can squeeze in a quick review here for a fantasy novel called Return of the Crimson Guard by Ian C. Esslemont. It's a novel of the Malazan Empire. First thing we gotta say about this is probably it is an awesome book. But right after that, before we talk more about the book, we should talk about when you should read this book. And what you should probably do is read it right after you read Bone Hunters from the main Erickson series, Malazan Book of the Fallen. Bone Hunters is the 6th book in the series, and basically the whole Malazan Empire kind of situation that's really kind of blows up in the later parts of that book. There's a lot of follow through on that whole big storyline in Return of the Crimson Guard. So you could instead read it after Reaper's Gale, but I don't think you should, because there's actually kind of a time gap between the end of Bone Hunters with kind of the Malazan army storyline and when they show up in Reaper's Gale. Spoiler alert, I guess you'll probably figure that out though. Reaper's Gale is basically, or pardon me, Return of the Crimson Guard is going to take place right in between those books in the sense of the chronology. It takes place in a very different setting. However, it does fill in that gap, and again, it provides a lot of development and partial resolution to the whole Malazan Empire internal conflict that's going on. And it has a lot of interesting touch points throughout with things you've encountered in the main Malazan series that are very cool and fun and rewarding as you read them and get a little more detail behind them. So for example, you hear a lot about these kind of different legendary Malazan Empire characters. And a lot of them are going to show up in Return of the Crimson Guard. So that's kind of cool that, you get kind of all this background or hints about what these people are about, and you're going to actually encounter them, for example, throughout this book. So that's very cool. You'll see some people in action that you've probably wanted to see in action, but the main series has not really given you that chance. Same goes for Knight of Knives. That's the only other Esslemont book that would have been written before this one. And that's sort of a prequel to the main series. There's actually a few characters that you will see from Knight of Knives that are going to show up in here. So good to read Knight of Knives if you haven't read that. And I don't know when you might be watching this, but if you haven't read Bone Hunters, at least read Knight of Knives before Bone Hunters if you can. Otherwise, I mean, definitely read it before this. It's worthwhile, although in my personal opinion, it's better to read Knight of Knives much, much, much earlier. Like, seriously, after Gardens of the Moon is probably the best time to read Knight of Knives. So I think, hopefully I've communicated something about why you should consider reading this in the midst of reading the main series. So don't go from Bone Hunters to Reaper's Gale. You can. It's not the end of the world if you skip Return of the Crimson Guard, but you really shouldn't. You should take a detour, put it in the middle there, read it. It's awesome. It's about 800 pages in my version, so it's quite a bit shorter than most of the Malazan books. So and it's really action packed. It's really quite good. It does kind of give, sort of, in a lot of ways, its own nicely self-contained story. So, or even multiple self-contained stories. So yeah, it's great. So let's talk about it a little more. Now, it has been a really long time since I've read it, and a lot of the details are a little bit fuzzy. But basically, you know, the Crimson Guard, they're coming back. They're great. One of their great leader dudes, Skinner, gets you know, this special power up, I guess you could say. He maybe becomes in league with a certain dark power, and yeah, the Crimson Guard are on their way back to Unta, which is I don't know, I guess it's Quantali. I don't remember all my words. So Unta's the capital or the city or something. Quantali, right. Quantali's the main kind of continent, I guess, of the Empire here. And so the Crimson Guard's going to be going back here. There's going to be a lot of wars, a lot of battles, a lot of very powerful people are going to be converging on this. All the while, there's this kind of internal conflict with within the Empire. You've got, what's his name? Malik Rel, who you might remember from Bone Hunters, and you would have also had some of him in Deadhouse Gates. He is, you know, kind of like the classic underhanded, scheming counselor guy, and he's kind of working against the Emperor Lysine. And meanwhile, the Crimson Guard's coming in. Meanwhile, there's some other strange developments happening. Like, there's kind of this, almost like a, what would you say, like a runaway princess, or kind of like the last heir of a certain family, and, you know, some people are trying to kind of get her out safely. And what else is going on? Like, oh, quite the review, huh? I don't even remember the book. Yeah. So, lots of Crimson Guard stuff. And you actually follow, for most of the Crimson Guard storyline, you're following this new recruit into the Crimson Guard. His name is Kyle, which is kind of funny because it's such a generic name, and he's almost kind of this classic generic fantasy kind of character, like a young guy. He gets a magic sword, he's with this mercenary army, he's going on these crazy adventures, and he kind of gets wrapped up in you know, this bigger conflict, this bigger quest. But he's cool because he's kind of your tool to learn about the Crimson Guard from within, and he's new, he's introduced to a lot of people, and therefore you're introduced to a lot of people through him, and you learn a lot about people's different stories because of what they tell him. So he's good, and he's going to be actually a character you follow throughout some other Esslemont books as well. So he's cool. He's kind of ordinary. He's kind of, like I said, he's kind of a stereotypical ordinary fantasy character. But remember, Malazan novels don't really make it all about one person. They're very much ensemble cast. There's lots of different kind of quests and stories and goals at play. So, but that's just good for the Crimson Guard, because one of the things with Malazan is it doesn't really take a lot of time to explain things to you mostly, and it likes to kind of like build up mysteries and kind of keep you guessing a little bit and piecing together clues and different bits of information. So it's kind of nice to have a character like this in Return of the Crimson Guard, you know, to help you learn about things. And it's cool watching him, you know, a cog in the wheel of this legendary mercenary companies, and encountering, like, you know, legendary characters from it. And he has some pretty wild encounters with other beings along the way, and just some weird stuff happens, and some characters from other books show up in unexpected ways, like well, you know, minor spoiler alert, he might be in the cast, so maybe maybe it's not necessarily a spoiler that he's in it, but if you like Calor is going to show up for a kind of interesting, strange scene in this book, and I always think that's interesting. Then, of course, there's this other kind of subplot with the mines. Like, basically this big excavation, and it kind of intersects with the main storyline in kind of an interesting way near the end. And you get kind of it's basically like sort of like the classic prison kind of thing, where some different factions among the slaves in this mine. So it's basically like prisoner slave kind of thing. But these two new prisoners show up, and they're very mysterious, and they alter the dynamic, and they're up to something, and they don't really seem to like be bothered about being mine slaves, because they're there kind of on purpose, and they've got this like big plan to unfold. Again, that will converge with things towards the climax. And so yeah, there's quite a bit going on the political side of things. On the military warfare side of things, you get some quests, you get some crazy villains, you get the supercharged, insane, over-the-top, epic military and magic battles at the end. And this book is just extremely action-packed overall. And I think Esslemont does a really good job with the battles, showing the scale and intensity of them all, and just, the magic feels huge, the characters feel larger than life and invincible, and there's crazy evil monsters being unleashed upon armies, and landscape shaking magic. It's all good. All the good Malazan stuff you would expect. Let's see. There was one thing I wanted to say. What was it? Oh yeah. So the jade statues, there's a little bit of that in this book too. So that's another reason you don't want to skip this book. Of course, the jade statues are one of the big mysteries of Malazan. I think a lot of it is sort of indirectly explained in the events of Bone Hunters, but if you want like a little more to that, because there's still some more to come, the puzzle's not totally complete. I just think Bone Hunters overall helps a lot with it if you kind of really read those scenes closely and kind of think about them. Depends maybe on your context and some of your background knowledge, or maybe how you project a certain kind of interpretive framework onto that whole thing, but I think a lot of it does explain itself in the events of Bone Hunters. But anyway, so yeah, jade statues are in this. It's again, cool, mysterious, doesn't explain that much, but it gives you some more things to ponder and wonder about, and you'll get a little bit more into that in the series. But again, one of the big mysteries. It's kind of fun to get another like glimpse at it from the perspective of different characters, and they're wondering what the heck is what's going on here. And so that's cool. Is there much else to say? I mean, it is really great. It's epic. It's got good battles. It's got interesting characters. The Crimson Guard is super cool. The Malazan characters are super cool. I mean, you've got kind of the low-level military squad on the one hand. You're going to follow them around a lot, like one of the saboteur companies. There's kind of some civilian stuff. There's the political stuff. Now, one cool thing about this book that I really liked is Empress Lacine. Now, she's an interesting character, especially coming out of Bone Hunters, because you're kind of wondering, like, is she, like, what is she doing? What is she thinking? Is she totally losing control of things, or does she have some kind of, master plan that's just beyond all our comprehension? It seems like things are a little off the rails for her, but one thing I do want to say that's cool is you do get to see her in action. And of course, she was like the leader of the assassins unit of the Empire, the Claw, at one point. So she's hardcore. And you've heard characters kind of talk about how kind of legendary her fighting and assassination ability and all that is. So you're like, do we ever get to see her in action? And you do in this book. So I think that's another cool reason to want to read this, or something kind of fun to look forward to. And she is hardcore. Hey, there's a cattail there. Okay, Lacine is hardcore. I liked that part. You know, I don't think I have that much more to say. It's good. I'll make maybe one last comment about some of the Esslemont haters. Maybe it's just what I've been exposed to, but it seems like a lot of people rag on Esslemont, like, oh, he's not as good as Erickson, or blah, blah, blah. And, you know, in some ways, he's almost better than Erickson, and in some ways he's not as good. And they're just different. Like, the style of these books, it meshes very well overall with Malazan, but Erickson's a very different kind of writer. And in fact, like, you know, I said this book's about 800 pages, I think. And I mean, it feels like a Malazan book. And on the one hand, it feels not 800 pages because it's kind of brisk and fast-paced. And I don't know, it feels physically kind of small. But the thing is, Esslemont, in this book in particular, like, slow down a little bit to read it, because for me, I had to be careful. There's so many things that are going on, and a lot of important details are just very casually inserted. I found there was a few times where I kind of like lost track of things. And it was because there was just a little detail that I didn't pick up on because I got reading a little too quick, I think. And it's just dense. Like, a lot actually happens in it, but it does move fast, and it is interesting. I think Esslemont's great. I think his dialogue's pretty good. His battles are awesome. His descriptions are good and epic. Like, it feels like a Malazan book, even though it is different, of course, from Erickson. And it's not just because of the label. It just has that feel of Malazan that perhaps Erickson sort of defined, but Esslemont is part of it. And why wouldn't they be? Because I don't know how long their friendship goes back, but they basically grew up, or an important part of their lives was kind of sharing this world together in their imaginations. It's kind of shared storytelling, cooperative storytelling. Like, you know, it's just a wonderful product they've created. It is the best fantasy series ever, and you can say that about Malazan Book of the Fallen. And you can expand that to cover the other Malazan books that you don't think of as part of that main series. But the whole thing is just really unmatched, in my opinion, in terms of sheer awesomeness. And Return of the Crimson Guard it's awesome. I think it's a must read. I think you'll really be missing out if you skip it and go straight to Reaper's Gale and maybe come back later, or never come back at all. Definitely squeeze in. If you're not going to read any Esslemont books for whatever reason, or you just want to read the main series, I strongly recommend doing this anyway. Leave the other ones if you want to, or if you have to. Don't skip Return of the Crimson Guard. All that being said, though, I definitely think all of the Esslemont books are worth reading, so read them. And I think that's it. I don't have much else to say. I don't really remember the specifics too much, but I'd give it 5 out of 5. You know, there's Crippled God stuff in it too. There's a lot of magic stuff, a lot of just kind of interesting development of the world. It'll add richness that you can really take back with you to the later Malazan books, and make them better because of some of these things that Esslemont gives us. Like I said it a while back, but it's really cool to see some of these characters that you've heard so many things about, but you've never seen them in a scene, and you've never like seen them in action. And a lot of these kind of old Malazan veterans are going to show up, and a lot of the people that you kind of been wondering about, you're going to see what they can really do. and especially the Crimson Guard characters, because you know the Crimson Guard and the Malazan Empire have kind of this big problem between them. Crimson Guard has basically vowed to destroy the Empire. But the hardcore, like, main commander guys of the Crimson Guard are pretty awesome and cool. And, you know, they have kind of their own honor system, and there's a little bit of, like, conflict in there too. And of course, you got the basically immortal and, like, godlike almost Avowed, which are kind of the main powerful core of the Crimson Guard, or at least if I remember how it works. But man, these guys take a beating at the end. They're basically just falling apart, and they just keep going. Some people don't like that kind of stuff, but if you like crazy, hardcore, epic fantasy action and novels, this is the best. Return of the Crimson Guard is awesome, so read it. I think that's a good place to end. We'll try and do some more reviews of these books someday. We have, we want to talk about, well, probably Reaper's Gale would be the next one. Or did we do that already? Reaper's Gale. I don't think we did that. Okay, well, whenever it is, we'll see you next time. We'll talk about Reaper's Gale. Bye for now.